Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome to my horror tier ranking video, aka my horror wrap up for the year so far. So I've done a similar tag, or should I say ranking video to this the last few years on BookTube. It all started with the Skull Ranking book tag inspired by Read from Lockpetition, who is doing Black Arenathon right now. Some of these books that I've read are specifically for Black Arenathon, even though I haven't made a TBR for that. I know I haven't, but as I've said in past videos, I've not been very consistent with my reading or my videos. But I am excited to talk about all the horror books that I've read this year. In past years, the Skull Ranking book tag has been basically a ranking of horror, as in how scary it is, and even then that's a hard thing to describe because some things aren't trying to be overtly terrifying so much as ominous or disturbing. I'm going to do a more traditional ranking in this video where it's not really horror, scariness that I'm ranking so much as just the quality of the book overall. To look at the tier ranking that I'm working with here, we have number 1, 5 stars, Immaculate. This is effectively I think a perfect horror book. And I want to be clear, even though I am saying this is more traditional ranking, I may end up ranking things in a different star here than I did on Goodreads, because Goodreads takes into account my raw enjoyment, which of course is a factor here, but I think it's a smaller factor. This is a question of whether or not I think this book is a good, like a really effective horror story, even if it's one that doesn't quite click with me. And that's how I'm approaching this ranking here. It's largely comparable to what I'll end up putting on Goodreads, but it's just more a metric of what I think makes a really good horror book for what it's trying to be, where horror can be a number of things that I will not get into. I have 20 books. I've not read a lot this year. The last one of these, or similar one of these tags that I did was back in December or January for last year. We're going to be going in order from books that I read first to last so far this year. First up is Tell Me I'm Worthless. For this one, it's very Shirley Jackson-y, and it follows a trans woman as well as one of her cis exes, and I believe another woman whose role I forget. And this is effectively a horror, like a haunted house, but also deals with mental health and demons, transphobia. It looks not only at the harm transphobia does to trans people, but also to cis people, the way it sort of warps them into just a disgusting human being. And for this one, I think I gave it 4 stars when I read it because of the raw enjoyment and not quite being in the headspace. But I feel like if I were to reread this and try to study a bit more, it would be immaculate. And I do think, based off my impression of it, I think it's a really well done horror book, and it doesn't hurt that it is heavily Jacksonian, Shirley Jackson-y. And I am a huge fan of Shirley Jackson and the way she writes stories. But it's just both ominous and disturbing, but also at times overtly horrifying. And I think this book just perfectly encapsulates that idea of Shirley Jackson. Next up, 11/22/63. This is me rereading this like for the 6th or 7th time is evident of the fact that I wasn't in the headspace at that time. And this was like back in January, February, so it tells you how this year has been a struggle for me. The fact that my second horror book was a umpteenth time reread. It's a favorite. I wouldn't say it's the best horror book. In fact, even though I would consider it 5 stars on a personal level, just because my raw enjoyment is just through the roof, I think as a horror book, it's good. Is it necessarily overtly horror all the way through? Honestly, even calling it horror is a bit of a stretch. But I think it's a good book, and even if it isn't necessarily what I think of when it comes to pure horror, I think it deserves to be considered a solid good book. The Women Could Fly. In this one, I remember reading, I think it might have been an arc, and it was really good. It also had sort of a Shirley Jackson tone to it. It reminded me a lot, though, of Handmaid's Tale, in that it was this world where witches exist, and they are basically subjugated and considered less than human. It has a lot of imagery related to, not imagery, but similar themes to that of The Handmaid's Tale. The difference is that a major part of this is that Black women are often considered witches, or suspected to be witches more often, meaning the identity of race is a major factor in the dynamics of the story. What would you constitute? I guess I would put it good overall, a good horror book. It felt more fantastical and sci-fi. That it's not trying to be horror. It's very ominous in its tone. I think that's very effective. But overall, I would, when it comes to what I like in horror, I would put it just good, but better than 11/22/63. Nana by Brandon Massey. This is solid horror, absolutely. So it's not going to be below good. It follows the story of this grandmother who enters house, and strange things starts to happen. And it looks at relationship dynamics and how a wife is basically gaslit by her husband and isn't believed that her mother is doing some horrific shit, or that horrific things are happening because of her mother. And I will say this book surprised me. I don't know if I would consider it my favorite book of all time, or even about like the books that I consider horror books that I really love. But as objectively when it comes to horror, I think it was a really effective horror book, well written, and really does a good job of solidifying itself as a solid read for anyone who's a fan of horror. I do love supernatural horror. So again, what is horror? That's a big question to ask. So take this. This is all personal opinion. Let's remind each other that and just keep going. Our Sheriff Knight. Okay, this book is way long, but long in a way that feels more justified than 11/22/63. And while it wasn't perfect due to some of the structuring that I found a little disjointing, overall, this book, in my opinion, was immaculate. I don't find its themes as well executed as Tell Me I'm Worthless, so I'll put it below that. But as a horror book, it's supernatural, it's horror, it's dark, disturbing, and it's just, oh god, the writing is on point. It's just so amazing. Honestly, one of my favorite books of the year, even more than Tell Me I'm Worthless, even though I'm putting it slightly less than Tell Me I'm Worthless when it comes to what makes a good horror book. I'm going to stop trying to hone in on the intricacies of how I'm ranking and just move on. Demon Theory, a book that is effectively 3 screenplays that are basically sequels to one another. And it reminded me a lot, personally, of The Last Final Girl, which is a book that have mixed feelings about, but honestly feel like it's just such an amazingly written and unique story. And I feel like Demon Theory is similar in that aspect by Stephen Graham Jones, I should mention, where we have so many beautiful homages to horror. And it's so clear that Stephen Graham Jones loves horror films, I should say. And that makes it just objectively makes it great. Even if in execution, the structure of the sort of 3 different films is disjointing and not always easy to follow, is honestly just a really great horror book. And while I think I give it maybe a little bit lower rated than Nana or Nada, I would honestly consider it probably just a better horror book overall. Hell Follows Us Here. I'll give it a good. This book leaned heavy in the urban fantasy, and it was YA, so not really for me. I consider it good, but not necessarily effective in its horror. I think its most effective horror really is its use of bigotry. While I do appreciate that and seeing how that's explored in books like Tell Me I'm Worthless, I just didn't feel like it was as effective for me on a personal level. So it just, as a horror book, I just felt like it was just good. No Gods for Drowning. Okay, I'm going to tell you, this book was great. Another one that I felt like was just hit out of the park. Not as good as Our Sheriff Knight, but it was my first reading of Hailey Piper, and I am so excited to read more of her work. I actually think I have an arc of hers. This is basically mythology, where we have mythological beings intertwining with our world. I think gods are gone, but there's a hint that they're possibly still there. And it's the intersection of mythology with humans and the horrors. It's a sort of dark fantasy more than strictly terrifying horrors, but it's still dark fantasy in a way that I feel like it really earns its sort of position as a horror book. And I would consider it great. Honestly, I think Demon Theory is better at objective horror when it comes to what I love in horror, but all in all, when it comes to great story and everything, I just have to put No Gods for Drowning above that. All the White Spaces, another one that's honestly going to make it to great. Not my favorite of the year. This is basically a story that follows a trans man as he embarks on a journey to the Antarctic. And he hides, I think originally on the boat, and sneaks on. Or maybe he hides that he's trans. I think it's the former of that. The point is that there's some really great exploration of that identity of him being a trans man, and also just the really effective use of Antarctic horror and like the isolation, the fear that comes with being so detached from society in this place that could so easily kill you. Add on top of that, supernatural horrors, and for me, like easily. I honestly wasn't expecting that when I started here. I thought I was going to put it like up and great, but I think objectively when it comes to horror, it was just really, really good in a way that I consider immaculate. Oh wow, more I talk about it, the more I love it. Okay, I'm so excited about all these books. Oh my god. I almost didn't do this video because I was supposed to really like filming, and now we're here and I'm loving it. Lone Woman by Victor LaValle, a book that I got an archive and I finally read, and I hate myself for not reading it sooner because my god, it was amazing. It was immaculate. We're going there. Not the best when it comes to objective horror, but the storytelling was compelling, and the direction it went was just utterly shocking. I didn't really know much about it going in. And honestly, I think you probably should. It follows a woman who's on a farm with her parents in, I want to say, like 1800s. It's around that time period. It was not really technology. And she moves west after a tragedy befalls her parents to basically start a new life. And it is Victor LaValle, and I feel like Victor LaValle often uses monstrous horror, and this is again another case of monstrous horror, but it explores what the true monster is, and really good use of horror themes to explore real world issues. That's really what I think all of these are. Is it better than All the White Spaces? Ooh. As in a book, I think I'd put it higher, but it comes to horror, like an intersection of the elements of horror and the quality of the book, I think I put All the White Spaces ahead of it. So I'm settling there. Continuing, Image from Monsters. This was a queer take on Frankenstein, and it was a comic. Oh, not a comic. It was a graphic novel. I read this with my partner, and it was a really enjoyable read. It is not objectively scary. I think it's at least teens, if not younger, so it doesn't really feel like it's trying to be scary, but it's macabre the right word, possibly. It's very, I don't want to say ominous, but it's very atmospheric, if not in like a too dark sense. And it's a really interesting exploration of identity and queerness. It's also just very sciencey, which I love. I would put it probably as my first real conundrum between great and good. I think I'd give it good, less than The Woman Could Fly. It's just where it lands in my perception. Balua by Christy Nagel or something. This was a contender for the Shirley Jackson Award, Best Novel. I had an idea to read all the nominees for the Shirley Jackson Awards for 2023. I got through like three-fifths of them. It's like the 31st now, so I'm not going to do it. But a few of these you'll see sort of come from the Shirley Jackson Award. This was one of them. I find it to be a great, disturbing and ominous book in terms of horror because it is Shirley Jackson-y or Shirley Jacksonian, and I've already told you how much I love Jacksonian horror. So, I think for me, it is sort of the transition from the story where it basically follows this family. I think one of them can see ghosts, and the family doesn't quite always believe it. A big part of the story is understanding their perception of reality, where it feels, I guess the best way to put it is emo, but also interesting from a curiosity standpoint about the ability to see these ghosts. But it can get pretty dark. Like, it seems innocent, these ghosts, but they're not always. And I think the story overall was really effective, if not like effective at translating or communicating the horror, the feel of the horror book in the story. But it really breaks down as like the overall storytelling, the pacing and the execution didn't really land for me. But as a horror book, honestly, I think it's really good, almost immaculate as a horror book. I just think the overall execution is really good, just not good enough. The Only One Left. Now, this one I read, and it was a bit of a hate read, but also like I heard it was really good. I was like, you know what, maybe I'll give him a shot. Maybe I'll give Riley Sager a shot again. I had a whole review and I lost it. So tell me if you're watching this. If you're interested in hearing my hate thoughts on The Only One Left, I'm happy to do it. Basically, it follows a nurse who's taking care of this older woman who is thought to have murdered her family. There is overlapping imagery between the two as far as being considered someone who did something that bad to their family. We basically had the two stories that come about or get explained as the story goes on. I think it's really effective in its dark horror, more or less. I don't think the story is very good. In fact, I think part of the story was good. It was the older lady's story that was good. The young nurse, her story felt like it was meant to be imagery, like to be a unique storytelling approach, but you really bogged the story down. And I can't give it great. He is really good at tone overall, and the story was still like mostly fun. If I think Riley Sager just is too caught up on the idea of outdoing himself, and it turns into caricature and nonsense, and I can't stomach it. Jackal by Aaron Adams, I think. I can't really quite read this. This was another one that was Shirley Jackson Award. I found the horror, especially at the start, less effective. But then again, the horror is also heavily uses race as a major theme. And as that became more prominent, I felt like it was very effective. And I think I would give it great. On a personal level, it wasn't quite as effective in the horror for me. Overall, I don't have a great reason why. At this point, we're dealing with a lot of good, a lot of great. And really at this point, it's largely just feelings pushing why I put Jackal at the low end of great. And it is really effective in setting up the tone, setting up this sort of monstrous mythos that's going on. It leans fantastical, and it's a question within a story on whether or not it'll actually go there. But then when you add on the racial horror, it makes it overall a very effective horror book. Wild Spaces. Ugh. I'm realizing now I'm not giving any meh. For me, the book was definitely meh. I could not get into the story. It's Lovecraftian, and I feel like it's good on its tone. So in that sense, I would give it the same way I gave The Lonely One Left, sort of the high end here. I think it's good in its horror. I just think its story doesn't resonate with me. And this one, honestly, I think was mostly personal. I don't think there was anything about the story that made it objectively bad. Oh, shit. If you're wondering how that happened, I have my watch so I can see the frame to make sure it's still recording, and I bumped the phone. Still, it's something about it that's objectively bad. It's just something that didn't quite work for me on a personal level. The Dead Friend Society, honestly, is really great in its horror. It feels like it's making use of some classic horror tropes and making some really unique ideas. Basically, these people are murdered in a house, and now they're ghosts. And it reminded me a lot of American Horror Story, the first season, Murder House. It wasn't as effective in its objective horror. Like, it felt more like campy horror. For that, I can't see it as being a better horror book than the rest of these. Like, it's the idea is really propels it. The characters are very one note. They don't really challenge the caricature that they really exist within. But this was another Shirley Jackson Award nominee, and I couldn't believe it. It felt like it was way out of place compared to the other ones that I've read, in terms of its effectiveness in its tone, but also in the themes it's exploring. It's felt much more shallow. It's a fun book. Don't get me wrong. Honestly, it's a really fun book. It's just objectively, it's hard to give a book that is just doesn't do much with the genre a high rating. Earthlings. This one, I'm going to say trigger warning for incest, sexual assault, pedophilia. This one I thought was about aliens, and it is a major theme. Our character talks about herself being an alien, but the story is really about rather using that mentality, that idea of escape, as a catharsis for this person who's trapped in a very horrific world. For me, it is disturbing in a way that is felt too grounded in reality for me to really enjoy. And honestly, I think if I gave it 4 stars, it was a solid book. It's just, for me, in terms of horror, it's good. It's definitely good. I put it at least on the higher end of good. But maybe not great, but it is really good in its horror. Oh, The Scarlet Gospels. Okay. This book was horrifyingly bad. Someone described it as urban fantasy, and shit, they're right. I so didn't want to believe that when I started this book. It is the sequel to Hellraiser, which Hellraiser isn't the peak of horror. Like, isn't a peak of highbrow horror, I should say. It was very effective at what it did. It turned the Cenobites, these demons, if you can see this here, zoom, enhance. It turned them into these otherworldly, almost angelic creatures, and this book makes them feel so utterly mundane in their ambitions and their goals, and it really tarnishes the world of Hellraiser. Obviously, I would just imagine it doesn't exist. Like, it exists, but in my mind, it's not the world that the Hellraisers actually exist in. Honestly, it was a chore to finish. I almost didn't, but I was so close to the end, and it's a book that did not need to exist. It's a book that doesn't do it service to its original. I'm being unfair in calling it horrifyingly bad. I need to have some spread here. And honestly, I probably should have more spread. The book is horrifyingly bad. I don't think it's a good book objectively, and it's hard to be good horror when you're so bad at being a good book. The Battle of Black Tom, this was a reread. This was one that I read in October. Actually, so was the Scarlet Gospels. But so this was one I read specifically for Black Arenathon. You know, I remember loving the Battle of Black Tom the first time I read it. The second time, I realized it was not quite as high as I remembered. I remembered the highs, and I think that overwhelmingly push the book higher. But really, a small chunk of the book is high. The rest is just good. I'm going to give it a solid, great book. It's really good, honestly. It's a story of this man who lives in the antebellum South, during Jim Crow in the South. And he gets caught up in some Lovecraftian horrors. Leave it at that. The Blood Colony, the third book in Tanner Du's African Immortal series, basically a vampire series. This series is definitely more urban fantasy. It's still a solid book. It is the most shocking ending of all 3 books so far, and it's the one that left me wanting to read more the most of all these. And part of that is because every book tends to end distinctly with a somewhat good resolution, and the next book then picks up in a wholly new place. This one felt like it decided to be more of a cliffhanger ending. The biggest thing pushing us back in terms of horror, I think, is that it's Christian fiction. And I love a good mythological story. But let's be honest, this isn't a mythological story. It's Christian fiction intended to incorporate real world beliefs in a way that just, I think, makes me expect the story to have a safe ending because it's Christian fiction. And this book did surprise me, but I will be surprised whether or not the next book can't do that. Overall, I think it's a really good horror book. It's really good at that tone and writing, is what I mean to say. So Tanner Du is a really good horror writer. This isn't her best horror book, because it leans heavily in urban fantasy. But overall, I would give it probably more than Wild Spaces, because objectively, I'm putting it below The Only One Left. But this is, again, as a horror book, I think, no. Actually, I think about it, no. It's just objectively better. This is a mix of good or okay horror and range of quality. From this point on, it's I think they're good books. It's a question of how good the horror is. That's what I'd say from this point. And finally, Out There Screaming. This one is one that I'm only 2/3 of the way through, and I really should have finished it, but it's Halloween. It's out on Halloween, so I'm going to rank it based on what I've had. So honestly, it is a really great horror. Some of the stories are more hit or miss than others, but overall, I think there were very few, if any, stories that I feel like are actually amateurish. They're all very high quality stories. They don't all resonate with me, but they're really well told, really well executed. It's horror at its best, and that it's using horror as a way to explore real world themes in a range of different ways. Some more effective than others for me on a personal level, but I would say it's a mix between good and immaculate, which means I think I would put it great. I'll put it at the high end of great, is my impression. If that changes, I'll pin a comment or something. But I don't see it changing. It feels like it's Jordan Peele knew what he was doing when he called in stories for this collection. He does not disappoint. I'll tell you that. The audio narration, by the way, is phenomenal too. That's everything. Those are all the stories that I've read this year that are horror or horror adjacent. Let me know your thoughts on all these books. If you disagree with any of my ranking in terms of horror, or my commentary on exactly the objective quality of the book, which of course is called objective. It's subjective, but still. This was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. If you made it to the end, let me know. Give me a Halloween pumpkin or something Halloweeny, pumpkin or something, to show me in the comments. Otherwise, have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.